Thanks for joining us today on the Dollars and Cents podcast. If you are listening to the Dollars and Cents podcast for the first time, it's a show where we get people to discuss some of the most interesting finance topics. And today we are talking about something that's close to many Singaporeans' heart and stomach, and that's the Old Chang Kee snacks. But this isn't just about indulging in curry puffs and chicken wing. We are linking it today to inflation with something we call the Old Chang Kee Index. And joining me today in this discussion is Dinesh. Dinesh, as usual, welcome to the show.
Yep, always happy to be discussing these important topics.
Yeah, and you can see we have Old Chang Kee. In case you're wondering what's inside, it's curry puff. And this one you can see, right? Chicken wings right in front of us. And, I'm going to take a bite later, but let me just start off with the discussion. So how this Old Chang Kee Index started was, Dinesh, I'm not sure if you remember, I think sometime in 2019.
Yeah.
It was in our previous office. And, I think there must have been a period of time where, was it me or someone else?
I think there was an Old Chang Kee right at the bottom of our building.
At Tanjong Pagar.
Yeah, at Tanjong Pagar. And then we always used to eat it whenever we got hungry about 3-4 p.m.
Yes. And I remember, when I first started working, this was my poly internship. Mm-hmm. So this was in 2006.
Yeah.
Almost 19 years ago. And when we were talking about it in 2019, it was about 14, 15 years ago, right? And when I was doing my internship, I remember very clearly, I was buying a curry puff and a chicken wing almost every other day, almost like a routine or ritual, right? And I still remember the curry puff back in 2006 was $1 and the chicken wing was $1.20. So in total it was $2.20, if my memory serves me correctly, because I remember buying it every day. Fast forward to 2019, about 13, 14 years later, and the same combo we had back then was now $3.20. So I remember I was doing some mathematics and I added up the numbers, and actually it adds up to an average annual inflation of about 3%, which was very in line with Singapore's overall inflation trend during that period, right? So I think the point was that the Old Chang Kee Index, if you look at it, chicken wing and curry puff, this is my version.
Yeah.
Right? This is my version. It seems to track inflation really well. And then fast forward now in 2024, curry puffs are $1.90 as of last year. Chicken wings $2.10. So altogether, it's $4 as of 2024. That means there's another annual inflation of about 4.5% from 2019 to 2024. Mm-hmm. Right? And so this is how we come up with the Old Chang Kee Index. I think some questions people ask is why curry puff and chicken wings are no reason besides the fact that I eat that combo. But I believe, and I cannot be 100% sure because I can't go back and find how much spring roll used to cost. But I believe if you use the spring roll, the fish ball, and the staples are kind of in line with the inflation rate, I think it's surprisingly consistent with the general overall inflation trend. Mm-hmm. So that's really the Old Chang Kee Index. And I think the main point we are driving is that, if you just have your favorite dishes at Old Chang Kee, your chicken wing and curry puff like we have here, or like I have here, you can actually track inflation pretty well over the years. And to be honest, I think I feel, I don't know about you because you don't eat Old Chang Kee as obviously as me, but I kind of feel it a little bit over the last few years. Mm-hmm. Because you don't notice it if you are looking at prices on a yearly basis. Yeah. Because in fact, I think now the Old Chang Kee curry puff, if I'm not wrong, is $2.10. As of 2025, the chicken wings are like $2.20, $2.30 now.
Right.
In the sense that inflation in the last few years, as we all know, has been higher than usual.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, or perhaps consistently, Old Chang Kee prices has kind of gone up a little bit more quickly than it used to be. And I feel it.
Yeah, I don't feel it as much, but I think all of us actually feel it with everyday products as well, right? So, when you first conjured up this Old Chang Kee Index, I actually went to look at, how much inflation was actually in food prices in general. Mm-hmm. So I took meat mainly because of the chicken wings. So I just took meat as like one barometer, no other significance, but I just took it. So in 2006, I think when you started this, the numbers itself, when you first got into Old Chang Kee, right? So this is an index. So just take the numbers with like a relative scale to 100 in 2024.
Okay.
So in 2006, it was 59.8. Just meat in general.
$59 compared to $100 as of 2024.
Correct. Right. So if you look at it, meat has increased about 67% since 2006.
Okay.
I think if you adjust that, it could be around that 3-4% range as well.
Yeah, but my chicken wing doubled in price. I mean, if you look at it from 230 to
Yeah, so that's why that it got me thinking that, okay, so maybe meat does not include other types of costs. So there might be other types of costs involved, like labor, or storage, or transportation. I'm not sure.
Rent.
But all these things probably rents as well. All these things have to go into the production of an Old Chang Kee product rather than just meat, right?
Yeah. I think that's one point to note, right? I think one of the reasons why Old Chang Kee, I feel personally, I mean, I thought of this idea, but I feel personally why it kind of said quite accurately actually would track inflation is that because compared to let's say you buy raw meat or just meat in general from the supermarket, sure, there's a bit of labor cost. Obviously, the supermarket has to pay rent to someone.
Yes.
But in general, a lot of the amount of you pay and the increments that happen in subsequent years has to do with the cost of goods itself, which is the chicken or the meat that you are buying. Right? Rental and labor is a component, but it's less of a significant component compared to Old Chang Kee. Right? Because when you talk about your Old Chang Kee chicken wings and curry puff, as you see here, it's not just about chicken costs going up. It's also about the rental of which the Old Chang Kee outlet is based at, which is typically your shopping mall or near your train station, as well as obviously the people working inside there.
And probably higher foot traffic locations, which may be more expensive than
the rentals, right? The rentals, and then obviously the person working there, his labor, his salary is going up as well. So when you look at it from an inflation point of view, I think it probably outpaces your supermarket goods in the supermarket, your fish, your chilled fish, your frozen pork, your frozen chicken, vegetables, and so much, right? The other thing also I would say, and I mean, there is this Reddit post actually that got started. I mean, there is a Reddit post and I see a Hardware Zone thread as well, based on this article. And thankfully, not many haters. A lot of people seem to
agree with you.
I don't know if they agree, but they have their own version, right? So I'm reading this guy who say that he's tracking it with his standard breakfast of wonton mee with a cup of tea. And according to him, from 2020 till now, he has risen 40%. So that's obviously more than, what I've experienced with Old Chang Kee. And some people also saying that, someone's saying about spring which is his spring roll, used to be $1.20 to $1.40, now $2. And then another person said it used to be 70 cents. So that must have been even later ago. I just want to give credit. I mean, there's this person who said he used Toastbox and Toastbox Index, gone up according to him in 3 years since 2022, a staggering 23%. So his set is $6 for a peanut thick toast set, $6 apparently in 2022. Today, $7.40. So 23% in 3 years. I would just say, I think Yakult prices has also gone up quite a fair bit. So, there are this, I think Toastbox and Yakult, I think if you talk about it being an index, I mean, no doubt the prices has increased, but I feel like sometimes when I go to a Yakult or Toastbox, I feel like it's a bit of a, not really a staple meal that I eat, like a bit of an indulgence. I mean, the kopi can be quite expensive nowadays.
Yes.
Right. So I think one thing that makes Old Chang Kee good, I think it's still really a staple. I think you see it, wherever the nearest Old Chang Kee is near a house, you still see people, coming, buying it on the way home, and they're not thinking of it yet as an indulgence. But, it's something that's a habit, right? And I think the price has to be kept in check such that it continues to encourage people to eat like me.
Buy and eat. Yeah, I mean, you're still buying and eating today, so they must be doing a decent job of tracking inflation so that you don't feel a pinch, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing that, recently happened as well, is the household income survey.
Right.
Household expenditure survey, sorry. Right, where I think they track every 5 years or so, they track, what people spend on and how much they spend on that.
Okay.
It's just a survey the government conducts. They go quite granular, right? But on a broad basis, we spend about 20% of our expenditure on food.
Okay.
Right. So if let's say you spend $100 a month, $20 will go on food. Right. So that's just like that an average. So in 2023, people spend $1,422 on average on food.
Okay.
So this is across all spectrum, like food.
This is as a household.
As a household, this is average. So you take like the lowest income group as well as the highest income group. So it's just an average.
Average is 1,422
in 2023.
Okay.
In 2017-18, which is when the previous survey was done, it was 1,204, so $1,204. So across the last 5 years, it was about 18% more.
About 3% a year, is it?
Correct. So about 3-ish% a year.
About right.
Yeah. In that same time, I think based on your prices, between 2019 and 2024, the OCK or Old Chang Kee Index rose about 25%, right? So
Yeah.
quite. I think OCK rose a bit more. Maybe it has other input costs.
Yeah, exactly. Because as I mentioned, the rental and the label is certainly something that as a company or as a food store, they definitely would incur, I think, a higher proportion of that as part of their cost versus if you're buying just food from the supermarket.
But the good thing is that it's not by much, right? 22% versus 25% on Old Chang Kee Index. So not by much as well. But since you wrote the article, I'm just wondering, how much can we read into these statistics to gauge the overall cost of living increase then? It's just one product, right? It's just one curry puff.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think it's a lot more relevant and a lot easier to understand when you look at something which you typically buy daily or at least a few times a day, a few times a week, right? Your economic bee-hoon near your coffee shop, it could be your kopi or kopi tea, which I think almost every other person buys daily. The only problem with some of these things, which is why I kind of like the Old Chang Kee Index a little bit better, is that because economic bee-hoon and your kopi tea can, sometimes from store to store, the prices might be different for factors just like as the coffee shop location.
Yeah.
And
it might also be some lag effect. Like some stores may increase it faster,
yeah,
right?
correct.
And then other stores, maybe they take a few months or maybe a year or two later.
Yeah.
They also increase it.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of coffee shops, it's not so easy, I think, for them to keep raising prices. So they might raise it in a more once every 2 to 3 years. Right, so if you happen to buy kopi C from this particular shop every day, and they happen to not increase for a couple of years, and then you may not feel it, then suddenly one day they will increase. Then
I think now that you mention it, every time we go to we work around Amoy Food Market, right? And then every time we go to the stall, they have that sticker covering the old price.
Yeah. Because they
That's
can't
literally sticker price, right? They keep changing it because the original board, obviously, when they created it, they put the original price. Then when they change it, you have to put a sticker over it.
Yeah. Unless they want to go from 990 to 1050, and they need to add extra notes. But I think the main thing about Old Chang Kee, I was thinking about it when I was researching on this article. The main thing about Old Chang Kee is that I think somehow, and I'm not trying to say it's a good or bad thing, but somehow when they increase the price gradually each year, 10 cents, 20 cents each year, it doesn't really feel like much of an impact. So in some sense, they are able to track even on an annual basis, as opposed to, let's say, you buy a chicken rice and there's just a tendency for the chicken rice owner, let's say he sells it $3.50 in the past. Sometimes they just want to move to $4.
Yeah.
And sometimes
when they charge $3.80.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they could, but quite often I see when they go from $3.50, then they would just go to $4.
Yeah.
Or $4 to $4.50. I think it's just a lot easier also from just counting it, because selling a chicken rice $4.20 times 7 packet is what's the math? Right?
Yeah.
Whereas $4.50 times 7 is a lot easier to count, right? And I think that it's just the way it is with a lot of hawker food. I think $3 you go to $3.50. Yeah, sometimes you have a takeaway 20 cents, 30 cents more, but usually they try to go to nice whole number or to the nearest 5.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with Old Chang Kee, I mean, I talk like I'm an expert. I really ought to, maybe I should work there or something. But I can see them, I sometimes when I go there and buy, I can see something is 190, some things are 210, 220, and it's kind of okay. I mean, whether you think it's expensive or not is one thing, but even the 10 cents, 20 cents increment is something that nobody's really, finding it weird. Maybe just because you buy usually not just one thing, but few, so it's going to add up anyway.
By saying that, do you think that people will be more up in arms when they see the chicken rice seller increasing from $4 to $4.50?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
it's
correct.
over 10%
exactly. Because
increase,
it's more significant, right? Because you go from $4 to $4.50, that's 12% increase, 12% increase. And that's just a little bit harder to swallow.
But maybe they don't see the last 3 years the guy hasn't raised prices.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Right? Then if you just even it out, it's about
It's actually
4%
the same.
increase over 3 years.
Correct. So what you have with like chicken rice or your kopi C is that different shops will increase at different point in time. Overall, in the long term, it probably still increases, I guess, somewhere near the rate of inflation, but somehow the jump is just a little bit more significant compared to, I think, Old Chang Kee. And so I think that's what I really like about the indicator. And this is still something I feel strongly about when it comes to OCK, right? Which is like, I still think it's an everyday brand, right? That is trying to appeal to the masses.
Okay.
Right. So you can argue that certain cafes, I mean, I'm just going to throw out Starbucks, for example, right? Like nobody, I mean, whether or not you think Starbucks is expensive, overpriced, affordable, I don't know. But like, I don't think a lot of people look at Starbucks as, at least for me, I don't think it's like an everyday brand.
Okay.
Right. It's kind of like a luxury drink. I mean, and when it first was introduced, and even till today, it's like an indulgent. Coffees are, $7, $8. I haven't been there for a while. I hope I'm not underestimating it based on the last time I'm
You're
there.
probably right. But I always thought of Starbucks as, providing a different value proposition
Exactly.
as well, right?
Yeah. So whereas for OCK, it's kind of like, to me, an everyday brand is kind of appeal to the masses. So I think from a pricing point of view, obviously they have to cope with their costs. But what they are trying to do also is they are trying to keep the price at a affordable range where people would still come back to get it, often. Right. And hopefully in larger volumes, because I always see people buying a few things, not just one quite often, like maybe for their family. Right. So I think they have the incentives to kind of keep it as an everyday brand, but yet at the same time, they have to cope with the cost pressure that, rental, labor, and food prices are pushing on them. So that's why I think in general, they track inflation quite well.
Yeah.
And as long as they choose to remain an everyday brand, I think that's where, it will track inflation.
I think maybe a final thought before you move on to your next question. I'm also wondering, is it because they are a much larger company and also a listed company today? I'm not sure if everyone knows they're listed as well. So tracking the prices is quite important, right? Because they need to put out this information to their shareholders. They need to show, hey, this is exactly the revenue that we're getting, and they need to show maybe changes year on year. Right? They can't afford to say, we didn't raise prices this year because it was too costly for us, or we didn't want to do it. So whatever it may be, they increase even that small amount.
I think they have a lot of stakeholders to really consider, right? Like what you rightly say, they have shareholders as a listed company.
Correct.
So they need to make sure that,
they're tracking all the costs and also sales
the
price
returns have to
properly.
be there. Yeah, the returns have to be there. At the same time, you want to make sure your customer remains loyal to you.
Yes.
You don't want to price out your loyal customer. I mean, I'm not sure if you guys know, but they've been around since 1956. So a lot of people...
Longer than I expected, actually.
Yeah.
So on the packaging, I'm
Yes, on the packaging, they've been around for a really long time. Obviously, a lot of people grew up eating the curry puff, I think, before, they have a lot of other things. But, it's a legacy, it's a heritage brand, right? So I think most importantly to me, it's a very localized brand.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very Singaporean brand. They are outside.
No, it is. I think when an outlet opened in London or somewhere in
it's
England,
way
right?
more expensive.
It was Singapore news, right? Old Chang Kee is in London today.
And, I just going to Google quickly.
How much it is there?
Yeah, but the price of the curry puff there is certainly not, oh wow, I'm looking at a classic, 395 pounds.
395.
So that's what, about $6-7 Sing?
Should be slightly less. I think 1.5. 1.6, right?
1.6 or $6 maybe. Yeah. So it's four pounds, right? In the UK, based on this 2023 price. So I
For
think
a curry puff, 4
for a
pounds.
curry puff, yeah, 395. So I mean, what the price is overseas, is not something you have to worry about because we're not buying it there. But like in Singapore, at least, it's a local brand, and it's priced for locals.
Yes.
So I think that's the key thing. But I just want to ask you as well, like, do you have examples for yourself? Like, what do you think is the most everyday food item? The first thing I think of is chicken rice. But the only problem with chicken rice is I feel, like, which store?
I don't know. Like for me, when you ask me, like, do I have everyday examples? I feel like, okay, I want to move out from food a little bit, and one of the things that I remember, because I love playing sports. So when we were young, we used to play football for free, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to compare like free versus debate.
There's a
bit of
different
that's
discussion.
a different discussion, right? But when we were young, we played football for free, and it wasn't just the kids who were playing for free. I think a lot of the adults played for free as well in open pitches, right? Free space.
Before football pitches were commercialized.
Yeah, correct. Now I think free space is a commodity in Singapore. So now whenever you go and play, you play on this commercial pitches. You have to like book it, and then you go with your friends. You make sure you got 10 to 15 players. You can't just go there and say, hey, who want to join my team, like in the past. So it was around my late teens, so our late teens, where I remember paying about $7 to $8, 15 people, $7 to $8 per person over 2 hours. So about $110
Right.
for 2 hours, right?
This is on a pitch, is it? A professional
This is on a commercial pitch.
Commercial
Yeah,
pitch.
we're not professional, but it's just a commercial pitch, right?
Does it come with a referee?
No referee, so it's just
pitch come with a referee.
you just get I think the only value is that maybe sometimes it's under shelter, so that's
Right.
quite weather resistant. And I think there is some elements of pitch maintenance. We don't have to play on the long grass, but yeah, no longer free. And I just played 2 weeks ago. One of my friends called me. I stopped playing for a while, but one of my friends called me 2 weeks ago. I paid nearly $15.
Oh wow, double.
Yeah, double.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought football is free, man.
No,
Those are the good old days.
So obviously, okay, I'm just thinking back to back then. Okay, now
$15 for a
$15.
chance to play 2 hours.
$15.
And you divide by how many people?
15 of us. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not
two teams,
even,
yeah.
it's a futsal, right? So,
Yeah.
wow,
15
that's,
times 15 of us. Yeah. Over $200
wow, my goodness.
More than double, actually. More than double.
Wow.
Yeah.
You
So
gotta
obviously
have
the pitches are larger.
The budget to play football these days.
Yeah. So I'm just comparing that. Yeah. So prices have increased across the board, and things, everyday things, right? From playing sports that you love to eating the snacks that you love.
Yeah. No, I think this is the way we think of, these are the kind, when people look at the CPI and they say it's up 3%, 2.8%, and, it's too high, it's good, lower since 2021. I feel like it's sometimes very hard to appreciate what the number represents, right? But when you think of your Old Chang Kee curry puff and chicken wing or your football pitch and you see that prices has gone up significantly over the last 10 years, for example, then it really hits home what inflation means and how, the same $8 can no longer get you, a football pitch per person, or, $3, you can't get you a chicken wing and a curry puff anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right.
And another thing on the CPI, right, that's, I don't know whether it's interesting, but it happened. So in 2024, they rebased the CPI.
What does it mean that they rebase?
So for any one of you interested in it, if you go onto the SingStats website, the Singapore Department of Statistics website, you will see that, the 2024 numbers are all 100.
Okay.
All 100. So it's just rebased to 100, right? And then you look at it backwards, and then you can from there tell how much prices have increased.
Okay.
Right. So for example, food, right? So food 100 this year. Sorry, when I say this year, I mean 2024, 100 in 2024. 2023 was 97.24. So you can tell, hey, food increased by about 2.8%. And then you can go through, even food, you can go even more granular. There's rice, flour, bread, biscuits. You can go all the way to...
And all these things adds up. Food being just one component, but it's things like clothing, telcos, transport.
Correct.
And all these things adds up to give you one CPI number.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think...
And that's called the all-item CPI.
All-item CPI, right? And I think that percentage, 2% a year, 3%, sometimes 4%, 5%.
Yeah.
I just think it's not something that people... It is a number, it's a theoretical number. But I think when you think of it from a practical perspective, you look at your football pitch, that's where you really see the numbers, and that's where it's easier to understand how price hikes in your everyday items can really affect your cost of living.
Yeah. And the other thing to note is also all items, right? So we've only been talking about price increases, but there are some products where you see price decreases.
Okay.
Right. So one example that I can think of is my mobile data.
Telcos for sure.
Right. When I first started working, I was probably paying more for my mobile data than today. Right.
Yes.
So
I think we're paying more for less.
Probably, right? Because nowadays you could have like hundreds of gigabytes. Last time it was very limited. I can't remember what it was.
I still remember my first, when I started working, so this was 2012, I think. Yeah, right. I was paying like $40, $50 for a
close to
plenty. That comes with just a bit on a few gig. Maybe you can say last time you don't need so much mobile data, fair enough. But I was paying a higher amount.
Yes.
Back then, $45, $50. Today, I with a SIM-only plan, you can pay like $20 or, even lesser if you really want to hack
Yeah.
it. And obviously you get much more, but in any case, you are paying less on a monthly basis.
Correct.
So that is deflation, at least in terms of some.
Which is why it's important to look at it as an overall number, right? We shouldn't just take food or, telco. You have to look at it overall as well.
Right. And this is a good point.
So when we look at the CPI basket, it changes over time. So what I mean is that, and one example from the report, you guys can go to the SingStat report and see it. But one example that they gave is that, when they're calculating CPI for cars, right? So I think this year what happened was that they add new consumption habits. So for example, in the car market, maybe they added EV cars, which maybe didn't exist or wasn't prevalent enough in the last time they did the survey.
How about like private hires or car rental?
Yeah, so probably this falls under the services, right?
Okay.
I think another thing is that a lot of people are spending online nowadays, so that's another category. So there are different consumption patterns, which is why it's done every 5 years, and then they're updated based on that consumption patterns as well.
Right. Which means that, it's hard to compare.
It may not
the
be
CPI now compared to what it was 5 years ago, right?
It may not be exactly like for like,
Right.
Because there may be newer types of products or newer brands.
So some of the consumption habits that are newer are being introduced to the CPI. Some of those that are less relevant will be slowly, removed or lower weightage given to it. So you can't really compare this rebased 2024 CPI to the one that was done in the previous exercise.
I think maybe from one survey to the next, it might be comparable, but maybe over the longer term, it might be, if you check like 4 surveys ago, maybe less relevant.
Yeah, wow. That's a lot of things, to consider when you talk about inflation in Singapore. Obviously, I think for most of us, we know inflation isn't going anywhere. I think we can only expect inflation to continue to rise. Steadily, hopefully over the next decade or so. But the most important thing to note is that as long as the cost of living, and inflation is rising at a rate that's slower than wage growth, we are still better off in terms of real term, right? Once you take into consideration our wage growth. So most important thing is really just to make sure you strive to continue earning a higher salary so that your earnings can outweigh the effect of inflation, right? So, and that's all we have for today's conversation about the Old Chang Kee Index and how, it affects inflation. But what about what you think, right? Whether it's a curry puff, a cup of kopi, or even your daily commute, rising prices will impact everyone. Let us know what you think and whether you agree with us or not. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to us if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to us on Spotify. Make sure to follow us as well. Thank you.